"I'll marry you if you take me," the woman said, her voice cutting through the saloon smoke like a blade through silk. Fletcher Brody looked up from his whiskey. The glass had grown warm in his weathered hands during the long silence that followed her entrance. Now it trembled slightly as he set it down on the scarred wood table. The woman stood in the doorway like something conjured from the desert wind. Her dark skin glistened with sweat and dust. Her yellow dress hung torn at the shoulder, revealing fabric beneath that had once been white. Blood traced a thin line from her temple to her jaw. Behind her, 3 men groaned against the saloon floor. Their guns lay scattered like fallen leaves. Smoke still curled from the barrel of the Colt revolver in her steady grip. "When is our wedding?" Fletcher heard himself say. The words surprised him more than anyone. 27 men sat in that saloon, most of them younger, richer, certainly more inclined toward matrimony. Yet his voice had been the only one to break the stunned quiet. The woman's eyes found his across the room. They were brown like creek stones, worn smooth by current and time. Something passed between them in that moment. Not love, not even recognition, but understanding. Recognition of the particular species of loneliness that drove people to desperate acts. "Right now," she said, "before they come." As if summoned by her words, boots thundered on the boardwalk outside. Marshal Crenshaw's voice boomed through the batwing doors. "Surrender now, girl. You're wanted for murder in 3 territories." The saloon erupted in whispers. Chairs scraped against floorboards as men leaned forward or pulled back, depending on their nature. Fletcher stood slowly, his knees protesting the sudden movement. At 42, he felt every year in his bones. "Preacher," he called to the thin man hunched over a bottle in the corner, "you sober enough to marry us?" Jeremiah Pike had been Silver Creek's unofficial minister for 8 years, ever since the real preacher died of consumption. He performed his duties between bottles, but his hands never shook when it mattered. They didn't shake now as he stood and smoothed his vest. "I am." The woman crossed to Fletcher in 5 quick steps. Up close he could see the intelligence in her eyes, sharp as winter air. This was not a woman who killed for pleasure or profit. This was a woman who had run out of choices. "My name is Leila Mee Washington, Fletcher Brody. You don't know me. No, you don't know what I've done. No. Then why?" Fletcher glanced at the windows where shadows moved like wolves in the growing dusk. The marshal's men were positioning themselves. Soon this place would be surrounded. "Maybe I'm tired of eating supper alone." Something flickered in her expression. Not gratitude, something harder to name. Pike appeared beside them, his prayer book already open. The worn leather cover had survived more hasty ceremonies than Fletcher cared to count. This would be the first he participated in. "Dearly beloved," Pike began, his voice carrying despite the whispers, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses." Outside, the marshal's voice rose again. "We know you're in there, Leila Mee Washington. Come out peaceful and we'll see you get a fair trial for killing Silas Blackwood." Leila Mee's jaw tightened. Her free hand, the one not holding the gun, clenched into a fist. "Do you, Fletcher Brody, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Leila Mee Washington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss. No celebration. Just the sound of boots on the back stairs as someone tested the rear entrance. Leila Mee leaned close enough that Fletcher could smell the desert on her skin, sage and sun-baked earth. "Blackwood isn't dead," she whispered, "but I can't prove it without destroying an innocent person." Thunder rolled across the sky outside, though no clouds had been visible an hour before. The first drops of rain struck the windows like thrown pebbles. Fletcher had lived in this country long enough to read the signs. This would not be a gentle storm. "Back door," he said. They moved together through the narrow hallway that led to the saloon's rear exit. Behind them, the front doors burst open. Boots stomped across the floor they had just vacated. The rain hit them like a physical blow, cold and driving. Within seconds, they were soaked through. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark black and white. Fletcher grabbed Leelamee's hand, pulling her toward the cluster of rocks that marked the entrance to the old copper mine. The shaft had been abandoned for 3 years, but it would provide shelter from both the storm and the men who hunted his new wife. They stumbled through mud that sucked at their boots, the rain washing away their tracks as quickly as they made them. By the time they reached the mine entrance, the marshal's shouts had been swallowed by thunder. Inside the tunnel, darkness wrapped around them like a blanket. Fletcher felt along the wall until his fingers found the old lamp someone had left behind. He struck a match against the stone, and yellow light pushed back the shadows. Leelamee sat heavily on a pile of discarded timber, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. The gun never left her hand. "Why did you really say yes?" she asked. Fletcher studied her face in the lamplight. He thought about the question, about the honest answer it deserved. "Maybe because I recognized the look in your eyes." "What look?" "The look of someone who's tired of running." She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the storm rage outside their temporary sanctuary. "I was his bookkeeper," she said finally. "Silas Blackwood's. I kept his accounts, managed his correspondence. I thought he was an honest man." "What changed your mind?" "I found records. Money that should have gone to the school for freed children in Tucson. Money that went somewhere else instead." Fletcher nodded. He had heard of such schools, funded by Northern charity and staffed by teachers brave enough to face the frontier. They survived on donations that rarely came and goodwill that ran thinner each year. When I confronted him about it, he told me I had two choices: keep quiet and keep my position, or face the consequences of crossing a white man in his own territory. So you chose a third option. I tried to expose him, gathered evidence, wrote letters to the territorial authorities, but Silas was smarter than I gave him credit for. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The thunder followed almost immediately. He staged his own death and made it look like I was the killer. Now he's free to continue stealing from children who need that money for books and food and teachers' wages. Fletcher absorbed this information slowly. In his experience, the truth usually lay somewhere between what people claimed and what they could prove. But something in Leelamee's voice convinced him she was telling him both. "Where is he now?" "I don't know, but he'll surface again when he thinks it's safe. Men like Silas Blackwood can't stay hidden for long. They need to be seen, to be respected, to have their importance acknowledged." The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was growing stronger. Fletcher settled himself against the opposite wall, close enough to keep watch, far enough to give his unexpected wife some space to think. In the lamp's flickering light, she looked younger than she had in the saloon. Or perhaps it was simply the absence of immediate danger that softened her features. "What about you?" she asked. "What makes a man agree to marry a stranger?" Fletcher considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, stained with guilt and regret that had followed him across 2 territories and 5 years of trying to outrun his past. "I led a cavalry unit once, made a decision that got innocent people killed." The words came out flat, factual. He had learned not to dress them up with explanations or justifications. "What kind of decision?" "The wrong kind." She seemed to understand that some stories required time and trust before they could be fully told. Instead, she asked a different question. "Do you think this marriage is real?" Fletcher looked at her across the small space that separated them. Real was a complicated word. Legal, certainly. Binding under territorial law. But she was asking about something deeper than paperwork. "Real as any other, I suppose. We both said the words, both had our reasons. And when the storm passes, then we figure out what comes next." Thunder crashed directly overhead, shaking dust from the tunnel ceiling. In its aftermath, Fletcher could hear something else. Voices, distant but growing closer. The marshal's men were still searching, still hunting. Fletcher reached for the lamp and turned the wick down until only the faintest glow remained. In the near darkness, he could just make out Leelamee's silhouette against the tunnel wall. "Whatever you decide to do," he said quietly, "you won't be doing it alone anymore." She turned toward him, though he couldn't see her expression in the dim light. "Is that what marriage means to you?" It's what partnership means to me, and marriage ought to be a partnership, even when it starts the way ours did." The voices outside grew fainter, moving away from their hiding place. The storm continued its assault on the desert, washing the world clean while they waited in the darkness for morning to come. The storm raged through the night like something with teeth and claws. Fletcher kept the lamp turned low, watching the tunnel entrance while Leela Me dozed against the timber pile. Her breathing came steady and deep, the gun still loose in her grip. When dawn finally crept through the mine opening, the desert lay washed clean. The air smelled of sage and wet earth, fresh as a newborn's first breath. Leela Me stirred, her eyes opening to find Fletcher still awake in the same position. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." She sat up, working the stiffness from her neck. Her dress had dried wrinkled and stained, but her spine remained straight. Fletcher admired that about her already. The way she carried herself despite everything trying to bend her down. The marshal's men, gone with the storm. They emerged into sunlight that felt sharp after the tunnel's darkness. Fletcher squinted toward the horizon, reading the landscape for signs of pursuit. Nothing moved except a red hawk circling high overhead. "My ranch is half a day's ride south," he said. "We can rest there. Figure out what comes next." Leela Me nodded, then stopped. "What if they're watching your place? Then we deal with that when we come to it." Fletcher's horse stood where he had left it behind the saloon, patient as stone. The mare was getting old, her muzzle gray with age, but she had carried him through worse storms than last night's. Leela Me mounted behind him without being asked. Her arms circled his waist, light as bird wings at first, then firmer as the horse began to move. They rode in silence through country that rolled away in every direction like a brown ocean. The storm had filled the dry creek beds with rushing water that would disappear again by evening. Flash floods and sudden droughts. This land gave nothing freely. Fletcher felt the warmth of Leela Me's body against his back, the rise and fall of her breathing. Strange how quickly a man could grow accustomed to not being alone. "Tell me about the cavalry," she said when they stopped to water the horse. Fletcher knelt by the swollen creek, cupping water in his hands. It tasted of minerals and distance. "We were stationed at Fort Huachuca, 23 men under my command. Young men, some, others had families waiting back east. The water ran clear over smooth stones worn down by countless storms. Fletcher watched it flow, measuring his words. We received intelligence about a hostile camp 30 miles north. Women and children taken captive. Orders came down to move fast and hit hard." Leela Me said nothing, but he felt her attention like heat from a forge. "The intelligence was wrong or deliberately false. I never found out which." "What did you find?" "A peaceful village. Families gathering late berries for winter storage. Children playing in the creek." The hawk cried overhead, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. By the time we realized the mistake, it was too late. The shooting had started. Panic took over. Good men became something else in the space of heartbeats. Fletcher stood, wiping his hands on his pants. The water had left them clean but could not wash away what they had done that day. 17 people died, none of them hostile, none of them armed. Leela Me moved to stand beside him. Her reflection joined his in the creek's surface, two faces looking back from the water's mirror. "You've been carrying that alone. A man should carry his own mistakes. Some mistakes are too heavy for one person." Fletcher remounted, pulling Leela Me up behind him. Her arms found their place around his waist again, and they continued south toward the ranch that had become his refuge from the world's judgment. The sun climbed higher, baking the moisture from the storm-washed earth. By noon, the ground looked as dry as if rain had never touched it. "There," Fletcher said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat waves. "Home." The ranch house sat low against the landscape, built from adobe and weathered wood. Corrals stretched behind it, empty now except for a few horses seeking shade. The barn leaned slightly to one side, held upright by stubbornness and hope. Leela Me's grip tightened as they approached. Fletcher understood. This place would either become sanctuary or trap, depending on who else might be watching from the surrounding hills. But the ranch lay quiet under the afternoon sun. Even the chickens had sought shelter from the heat. Fletcher helped Leela down from the horse, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary at her waist. She did not pull away. Inside, the house felt cool and dim. Fletcher had built it himself over 2 summers, planning each room for a family he had never brought home. The kitchen was larger than one man needed. The bedroom felt empty as a church on Monday morning. "It's peaceful," Leela said, running her fingers along the wooden table he had crafted during his first winter alone. "Quiet anyway." She moved to the window that looked east toward Silver Creek. Her silhouette against the glass reminded Fletcher of everything he had convinced himself he did not want. "They'll come looking here eventually." "Yes." "Are you prepared for that?" Fletcher considered the question. His rifle hung above the fireplace, cleaned and loaded out of long habit, but preparation meant more than weapons. "Are you?" Leela turned from the window. In the house's subdued light, her face looked softer than it had in the harsh desert sun. "I've been running for 3 months. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. Then we make our stand here." "We," the word hung between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Fletcher met her gaze directly. "I spoke vows yesterday. Might have been hasty circumstances, but the words still count." Something shifted in Leela expression. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of it. "I can work," she said. "Keep books, manage accounts. I won't be dead weight while you risk your neck for me. This ranch could use proper bookkeeping." Fletcher pulled out the wooden crate where he kept his financial records. Papers spilled across the table in disorganized chaos. Bills unpaid, income uncertain, the mathematics of failure written in fading ink. Leela lifted one of the ledger books, her eyebrows rising at what she found inside. "When did you last balance these accounts?" "Christmas." "Which Christmas?" Fletcher cleared his throat. 2 years past." Leela sank into the chair across from him, spreading papers like a general planning a campaign. Her fingers moved quickly through the columns of numbers, finding patterns and problems with practiced ease. "You're hemorrhaging money on feed costs, buying retail when you could purchase direct from the grain cooperative in Tucson." "I didn't know there was a grain cooperative in Tucson." "There is. And your beef contracts are underpriced by at least 15% compared to current market rates." Fletcher watched her work, noting how her shoulders relaxed when she focused on problems that could be solved with logic and arithmetic. This was her element. Numbers did not lie or betray or disappear in the night. "How do you know so much about cattle prices?" "Blackwood owned 3 ranches in addition to his mining interests. I managed the books for all of them." Her hands stilled on the papers. Fletcher saw the moment when memory caught up with present circumstances. "He taught me the business by making me fix his mistakes. Said it was cheaper than hiring a proper accountant. Sounds like his loss became my gain." Leela looked up, meeting his eyes across the scattered ledgers. "Is that what this is? A business arrangement?" Fletcher studied her face, noting the careful neutrality of her expression. She was protecting herself against disappointment. He recognized the strategy because he used it himself. "It could be more," he said carefully, "if both parties were willing, and if we survive long enough to find out." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. Fletcher stepped to the window, scanning the horizon for signs of approaching riders. "Company coming," he said quietly. Leela joined him at the glass. A single horseman approached from the north, riding at an easy pace that suggested confidence rather than urgency. "Marshall?" "No, someone else." The rider drew closer, resolving into a familiar figure. Marshall Crenshaw sat his horse with the relaxed posture of a man making a social call rather than an arrest. Fletcher opened the door before the marshal could knock. Crenshaw touched his hat brim, nodding to both of them. "Mrs. Brody," he said, acknowledging Leela new legal status. "Might I come in? We need to talk." Leela hand moved instinctively toward her gun, but Fletcher touched her arm gently. "Let's hear what he has to say." Crenshaw entered, removing his hat and settling into the chair Fletcher offered. His badge caught the lamplight, but his manner seemed more worried than official. "I've been investigating Silas Blackwood for 8 months," he said without preamble. "You're not the first person he's framed for his own crimes." Leela Me sank into her chair, the ledger books forgotten. "He's alive, very much so, and he's put $1,000 bounty on your head, dead or alive." The number hit Fletcher like a physical blow. $1,000 would bring every bounty hunter and desperate man within 500 miles. "Why are you telling us this?" Leela Me asked. Crenshaw leaned forward, his expression grim. "Because Blackwood's operation is bigger than embezzlement. He's been funneling money to hostile groups, selling them weapons, stirring up trouble between settlers and peaceful tribes." Fletcher felt the ground shift beneath him. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets innocent people killed. The kind that destroys communities and starts range wars. The marshal's words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Fletcher thought about his cavalry unit, about intelligence that had been wrong or deliberately false. How long has this been going on? At least 3 years, maybe longer. 3 years. The timing made Fletcher's chest tighten with a familiar weight of guilt and recognition. "There's more," Crenshaw continued. "Blackwood's coming to Silver Creek, planning to make a public appearance, claim his property back, and demand justice for his attempted murder." Leela Me's face had gone pale. "When?" "Within the week." Fletcher reached across the table, covering Leela Me's hand with his own. Her fingers were cold despite the afternoon heat. "What do you need from us?" Fletcher asked. "Help me prove what he's been doing. The evidence exists, but it's hidden somewhere only Mrs. Brody would know to look." Leela Me withdrew her hand from Fletcher's, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off a chill. "The mine," she said quietly. "He kept duplicate records hidden in the old copper mine east of town. Insurance against his business partners if they ever tried to cheat him." "The same mine where we sheltered from the storm," she nodded. "The records are there, everything. The weapons sales, the stolen donations, the payments to men who attacked peaceful settlements." Fletcher understood now why she had looked so familiar with the mine's layout, why she had known exactly where to find shelter. "Getting those records won't be easy," Crenshaw warned. "Blackwood has men watching every approach to town." "Then we go at night," Fletcher said, "during the new moon when the darkness is thickest." Leela Me looked between the two men, her expression unreadable. "This isn't your fight," she told Fletcher. "You could take me to Mexico instead. Start over somewhere they've never heard of Silas Blackwood." Fletcher considered this. Mexico was only 2 days hard riding. They could disappear across the border, become different people with different names. Live quietly in some mountain village where the past could not follow. But running would not stop Blackwood from destroying other lives, would not prevent more innocent people from dying because of weapons he sold and conflicts he manufactured. "Some fights choose you whether you want them or not," Fletcher said finally. Leela Me studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded, decision made. "The records are hidden behind a false wall about 50 yards into the main shaft. I can find them in the dark." Crenshaw stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll meet you there tomorrow night, 1 hour after sunset." After the marshal left, Fletcher and Leela Me sat in the growing dusk, listening to the evening sounds of the desert. Coyotes called from the distant hills, their voices rising and falling in ancient harmonies. "Are you afraid?" Fletcher asked. "Terrified," Leela Me admitted, "but also relieved. I'm tired of running from the truth." Fletcher reached for her hand again. This time she did not pull away. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, distant and cold but steady in their courses. Fletcher thought about patterns and constants, about the things that remained fixed while everything else shifted like sand in the wind. Tomorrow night would bring its own dangers and revelations. But tonight, for the first time in years, he was not alone with his ghosts. Leela Me's fingers intertwined with his, warm and real and present. The ledger books lay scattered across the table between them, proof that even the most tangled problems could be solved with patience and careful attention. We should eat something, Fletcher said eventually. Long day tomorrow. Leela Mee smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. Yes, we should. They moved around each other in the kitchen with surprising ease, falling into rhythms that felt both new and familiar. Fletcher sliced bread while Leela Mee prepared coffee. Small domestic gestures that spoke of partnership and possibility. The meal was simple but shared, eaten by lamplight while the desert settled into its nightly quiet. And for a few hours, they were just a man and woman sitting at their own table, planning for a future that might or might not come to pass. 3 weeks passed like water finding its level. Leela Mee transformed Fletcher's chaotic bookkeeping into ordered columns that told the story of a ranch that could survive, even prosper, with proper management. She worked at the kitchen table each morning, her dark fingers moving across ledger pages with practiced precision. Fletcher found himself lingering over his coffee, watching the way sunlight caught the concentration in her eyes. The grain cooperative in Tucson will save you $40 a month, she said without looking up. But you need to place orders 6 weeks in advance. Fletcher nodded, though he was studying the curve of her neck rather than listening to feed schedules. 3 weeks of marriage had taught him the geography of her gestures, the way she tucked stray hair behind her ear when solving difficult problems, how her shoulders relaxed when the numbers finally balanced. What about the Henderson contract? Renegotiated. 20% increase, effective next delivery. She set down her pen, flexing fingers cramped from hours of calculations. Fletcher noticed the calluses on her palm, evidence of work that went beyond bookkeeping. This woman had spent her life solving other people's problems. "You're making me rich," he said. "I'm making you solvent. There's a difference." Their eyes met across the scattered papers. Something passed between them, warm and unspoken. Not love, exactly, but recognition of partnership, of two people building something together from broken pieces. The moment broke when hoofbeats drummed in the yard outside. Fletcher rose, hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. Through the window he saw 3 riders approaching under a white flag of parley. "Bounty hunters?" Leela Mee asked. "Maybe." But the lead rider wore a familiar blue shirt, Tom Brennan, who owned the spread 20 miles north. Behind him rode Jake Morrison and old Pete Vasquez, neighbors Fletcher had known for years. Fletcher opened the door before they dismounted. Brennan touched his hat brim, acknowledging Leela Mee with careful politeness. "Fletcher." "Ma'am, Tom." The 3 men stood awkwardly in the afternoon heat, shifting their weight like boys called before the schoolmaster. Finally Brennan cleared his throat. "We heard about your marriage. Come to welcome your wife to the territory." Leela Mee appeared beside Fletcher, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was genuine but guarded. "That's kind of you." Morrison stepped forward, hat in his hands. "My Sarah sent preserves, peach and strawberry both." He held out a cloth bag heavy with glass jars. Leela Mee accepted it with the grace of a woman accustomed to navigating delicate social currents. "Please thank her for me. She'd like to meet you proper," Morrison continued. "Sunday service if you're inclined." Fletcher felt Leela Mee tense beside him. Sunday service meant the whole community, questions they were not ready to answer, scrutiny that could prove dangerous. "We'll consider it," Fletcher said carefully. Vasquez spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of age and experience. "There's talk in town about trouble coming. Thought you should know." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that follows bounty hunters and wanted posters." Fletcher and Leela Mee exchanged glances. The peaceful weeks had been an illusion, borrowed time that was running out. "How much talk?" Fletcher asked. "Enough," Brennan said. "Some folks are nervous. Having a suspected killer in the territory makes people jumpy." Leela Mee stepped forward, her chin raised in quiet defiance. "I haven't been convicted of anything." "No, ma'am," Brennan agreed. "But perception can be as dangerous as truth in a place like this." The words hung in the air like heat shimmer, distorting everything they touched. Fletcher felt the careful balance they had built beginning to shift. "What are you suggesting?" "Maybe it would be better if you took a trip," Morrison said, "until things settle down. This is my home." And we respect that, Vasquez said. But we got families to think about. Children who don't understand why grown folks are walking around armed all the time. Fletcher understood their position. These were good men trying to protect their own. But understanding did not make their request easier to accept. We need time to think, Leela Mee said. Brennan nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Fair enough, but don't take too long deciding. Word is there's $1,000 on your head now. That kind of money draws the wrong sort of attention. After they left, Fletcher and Leela Mee stood in the doorway watching dust settle in the empty yard. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. They're afraid, Leela Mee said finally. They're practical, there's a difference. She turned toward him, studying his face in the afternoon light. Are you having second thoughts about this arrangement? Fletcher considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago he had been a man eating supper alone, talking to horses because they were the only creatures willing to listen. Now he shared his table with a woman whose mind challenged him and whose presence filled spaces he had not realized were empty. No second thoughts, even if it costs you everything. What's everything? This ranch. The respect of neighbors who visit once a month. I had nothing worth keeping before you arrived. Leela Mee moved closer, close enough that he could smell the soap she used to wash her hair. Rose petals and hope. You had peace. I had emptiness. There's a difference. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with the natural ease of lovers long married. But they were not lovers, Fletcher reminded himself. They were two people learning to trust each other with their broken pieces. The evidence from the mine, she said. Maybe it's time. Fletcher nodded. Marshal Crenshaw had been waiting 3 weeks for them to retrieve Blackwood's hidden records. 3 weeks of borrowed safety while bounty hunters searched other territories and the price on Leela Mee's head continued to rise. Tonight, they spent the remaining daylight hours preparing. Fletcher cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition. Leela Mee studied a hand-drawn map of the mine tunnels, memorizing every branch and dead end. As darkness settled over the desert, they saddled Fletcher's horse and his older mare. The animals sensed their tension, stepping nervously in the corral. Once we do this, there's no going back, Fletcher said. There was no going back the moment I walked into that saloon. They rode toward Silver Creek under a moonless sky, the only light coming from stars scattered like thrown salt across black velvet. The desert lay quiet around them, but Fletcher felt eyes watching from every shadow. At the mine entrance, they found Marshal Crenshaw waiting with his horse hidden behind a boulder. His face looked grim in the starlight. You're sure about this? As sure as we can be, Leela Mee replied. She led them into the tunnel, moving with confidence born of familiarity. The darkness pressed against them like something alive, broken only by the weak glow of Fletcher's lantern. 50 yards in, Leela Mee stopped beside what appeared to be solid rock. Her fingers found hidden catches, and a section of the wall swung inward on concealed hinges. Behind the false wall lay a metal strongbox, heavy with documents and ledger books. Crenshaw opened it carefully, his face hardening as he scanned the contents by lamplight. This is it, he said quietly. Everything we need to hang Blackwood and his associates. Fletcher lifted one of the ledgers, reading names and dates that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Weapons sold to hostile tribes. Attacks orchestrated to justify military action against peaceful settlements. Money stolen from schools and churches to fund private wars. My God, he whispered. Leela Mee touched his arm, her face pale in the lamplight. The Fort Huachuca incident is in there. Third ledger about halfway through. Fletcher found the entry with trembling hands. There it was, written in Blackwood's careful script. Payment to provide false intelligence about hostile camps. Coordinates that would send cavalry units to attack peaceful villages instead of enemy strongholds. He set us up, Fletcher said, his voice hollow with realization. All of it, the dead children, the destroyed families, it was all for profit. Crenshaw placed a hand on Fletcher's shoulder. You couldn't have known. I should have questioned the intelligence. Should have verified the reports. You followed orders, same as any good soldier. but Fletcher barely heard him. 3 years of guilt and self-recrimination crumbled as the truth rewrote his understanding of that terrible day. He had been a victim, not a perpetrator, a tool used by men whose greed exceeded their humanity. Leela Mee moved closer, her presence anchoring him to the present moment. "We all did what we thought was right with the information we had," she said softly. "Now we have different information," Crenshaw added, "and we can do something about it." They gathered the documents quickly, stuffing them into saddlebags designed for grain rather than evidence of federal crimes. Outside, the night remained quiet, but Fletcher felt time pressing against them like a physical weight. "Blackwood arrives in Silver Creek tomorrow," Crenshaw said as they prepared to separate. "This evidence will be enough to arrest him, but we need to move fast. What do you need from us?" "Stay hidden until I can get federal marshals here from Tucson. Once Blackwood is in custody, you'll be safe to come forward." Fletcher helped Leela Mee mount her horse, noting how naturally she settled into the saddle. 3 weeks of ranch life had taught her new skills, just as she had taught him new ways of seeing his own worth. They rode home through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying secrets that would reshape the territory's recent history. Behind them, the mine entrance yawned black against the star-filled sky, finally empty of its poisonous cargo. At the ranch, they unsaddled the horses in comfortable silence. 3 weeks had taught them to work together without constant conversation, reading each other's movements and intentions. Inside the house, Fletcher built up the fire while Leela Mee prepared coffee, domestic rituals that felt both ordinary and precious. "How do you feel?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. Fletcher considered the question. The guilt that had driven him across 2 territories was dissolving, replaced by something he had almost forgotten how to feel. "Lighter," he said finally, "like I've been carrying a stone in my chest and suddenly remembered how to breathe." Leela Mee smiled, her first unguarded expression since the night they married. "Now you know how I felt when I realized Blackwood was still alive. The truth doesn't always set you free immediately, but it starts the process." Fletcher reached across the table, covering her hand with his. This time, neither of them pulled away. Outside, dawn began to touch the eastern horizon with fingers of gold and rose. A new day was coming, carrying with it the promise of justice and the possibility of peace. For the first time since their hasty wedding, Fletcher allowed himself to imagine a future that stretched beyond simple survival. A future where he and Leela Mee could build something lasting from the trust they were learning to share. But first, they had to survive whatever Silas Blackwood would bring to Silver Creek. Silas Blackwood arrived in Silver Creek like a disease returning to healthy flesh. Fletcher watched from the ridge above town as a carriage rolled down Main Street, flanked by 6 hired guns whose weapons caught the morning sun. Leela Mee crouched beside him, her spyglass trained on the man who had destroyed her life. Her breathing remained steady, but Fletcher noticed how her knuckles whitened around the brass tube. "He looks exactly the same," she said quietly, as if staging his own death was nothing more than changing clothes. Blackwood stepped from the carriage with theatrical flourish, his silver hair gleaming, his black suit immaculate despite the dusty journey. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. The townspeople gathered in the street, drawn by curiosity and the promise of drama. Fletcher recognized faces he had known for years, neighbors who had welcomed him when he first settled in the territory. Now those same faces showed suspicion and fear. Word of the $1,000 bounty had spread through the community faster than wildfire. Fletcher and Leela Mee had become pariahs overnight, their brief acceptance evaporating under the weight of Blackwood's lies. "He's giving a speech," Leela Mee observed. Blackwood raised his hands, commanding attention with the ease of a natural performer. His voice carried across the desert air, each word precisely calculated for maximum effect. "Good people of Silver Creek, I come before you as a man miraculously saved from death. The woman who tried to murder me, who stole my property and fled into the wilderness, has found sanctuary among you." Fletcher felt his jaw clench. The man's audacity was breathtaking. I ask only for justice, for the return of what was stolen, for the punishment of crimes that threaten the very foundation of civilized society. The crowd murmured agreement. Fletcher watched Tom Brennan nod along with the others, good men swayed by silver words and manufactured righteousness. "He's turning them against us," Fletcher said. "He's always been good at that, making people believe his version of truth while burying the real one." Blackwood continued his performance, weaving a tale of betrayal and violence that painted Leela Mee as a dangerous criminal. He spoke of children threatened, families torn apart, communities living in fear. All lies, but lies wrapped in enough truth to make them believable. "We need to get back to the ranch," Fletcher said. "Crenshaw will send word when the federal marshals arrive." But as they descended the ridge, Fletcher noticed dust clouds rising from multiple directions. Riders converging on Silver Creek from north and south, drawn by the promise of easy money. Bounty hunters, more than Fletcher had ever seen in one place. At the ranch, they found evidence of unwelcome visitors, boot prints in the dust around the house, horse tracks leading to and from the corral. Someone had been watching, waiting, measuring their defenses. Leela Mee checked the kitchen while Fletcher examined the barn. Nothing appeared disturbed, but the violation of their sanctuary felt complete nonetheless. "They know our routines now," Leela Mee said when they regrouped in the house. "When we rise, when we work, when we sleep." Fletcher nodded, his mind already shifting to defensive positions. The ranch sat in open country with few natural barriers. If bounty hunters decided to attack, they would have every advantage. "We could still run," he said. "Mexico is 2 days hard riding." Leela Mee moved to the window that faced Silver Creek, her silhouette dark against the afternoon light. "And let Blackwood continue destroying lives. Let those federal crimes go unpunished. Better than getting killed for the sake of justice that might never come." She turned from the window, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Those children at the school in Tucson. They're still not getting the money meant for their education. More innocent people will die from weapons Blackwood sells to hostile groups. Running doesn't stop any of that." Fletcher understood her position, understood and admired the courage it required, but understanding did not make the practical realities any less dangerous. What if Crenshaw can't get federal help? What if we're fighting this alone? Then we fight it alone. The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with consequences neither could fully predict. Fletcher studied Leela Mee's face, noting the determination that had carried her through 3 months of running and hiding. This was not a woman who would spend her life looking over her shoulder. "All right," he said finally, "we make our stand here." Something shifted in Leela Mee's expression, not relief exactly, but recognition of partnership chosen freely rather than accepted from desperation. "How do we prepare?" Fletcher moved to the gun cabinet, taking inventory of weapons and ammunition. 2 rifles, a shotgun, 3 pistols. Enough firepower for a siege if used wisely. "We control the approaches, make them come to us on our terms." They spent the afternoon preparing defensive positions. Fletcher moved the horses to the far pasture where they would be safe from stray bullets. Leela Mee gathered water and food supplies, preparing for a conflict that might last days. As evening approached, they ate supper by lamplight, the windows covered to prevent silhouettes from showing against the glass. The meal was simple but shared, eaten in comfortable silence that spoke of trust built through trial. "I need to tell you something," Leela Mee said as they cleared the dishes. Fletcher waited, reading tension in the careful way she stacked plates. "The night we married, when I walked into that saloon and saw you sitting alone, it wasn't random." "What do you mean?" "I had been watching the town for 2 days trying to figure out who might help me. You were the only man who didn't look at me with hunger or hatred, just recognition." Fletcher absorbed this information slowly. Their meeting had not been chance but choice, calculated decision made under extreme pressure. "Does that change anything for you?" she asked. Fletcher considered the question honestly. Did it matter that she had chosen him for practical reasons rather than romantic ones? Did the foundation of their relationship need to be love to become something meaningful? No, he said finally. Good marriages have been built on less. And what do we have? Fletcher looked at her across the small table, noting how the lamplight caught the intelligence in her eyes. 3 weeks had taught him to read her moods, to anticipate her thoughts, to appreciate the quiet strength she brought to every task. We have partnership, respect, trust that's growing stronger every day. Is that enough? Before Fletcher could answer, horses approached the house at speed. Multiple riders, their hoofbeats drumming urgency into the desert night. Fletcher extinguished the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Through the covered window, he could see torches moving in the yard. "Fletcher Brody," a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there. Send out the woman and nobody gets hurt." Fletcher recognized the voice. Ezra Toomlin, a bounty hunter whose reputation was built on finding people who did not want to be found. "How many?" Leela Mee whispered. Fletcher counted torch flames through gaps in the window covering. 8, maybe 9. Too many to fight directly. Maybe not. Fletcher moved to the back room where he kept his hunting gear. Among the traps and snares was a small keg of black powder left over from blasting stumps. "You have a plan?" Leela Mee asked. "The beginning of one." Outside, Toomlin's voice rose again. "You got 1 minute to decide, Brody. Then we come in shooting." Fletcher met Leela Mee's eyes in the darkness. The moment of choosing had arrived sooner than expected, bringing with it all the dangers they had tried to prepare for. "Stay low," he said. "Move when I move. Trust me to get us through this." "I do trust you." The words carried weight beyond their immediate circumstances. Trust earned through shared meals and honest conversation. Trust built on respect and mutual recognition of each other's worth. 30 seconds, Brody. Fletcher lifted his rifle, checking the load by touch. Beside him, Leela Mee drew her pistol with steady hands. Outside, the bounty hunters waited with the patience of wolves, confident in their numbers and superior position. They had made one crucial mistake, however. They had assumed their prey would cower in the darkness instead of bringing the fight to them. Fletcher smiled grimly, his mind already calculating angles and distances. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Fletcher moved through his own house with the silence of winter snow. The black powder keg fit perfectly in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, connected by a trail of gunpowder to the barn, where the bounty hunters would expect them to make their stand. Leela Mee watched from the doorway, her pistol ready but her eyes focused on Fletcher's careful preparations. 3 weeks of marriage had taught her to read his intentions through gesture and movement. "Time's up, Brody," Toomlin's voice cracked across the yard. "We're coming in." Fletcher struck a match. The flame caught the powder trail with a whisper, racing toward the cellar faster than a man could run. He grabbed Leela Mee's hand, pulling her toward the back door as boots thundered on the front porch. They slipped into the night just as wood splintered behind them. The bounty hunters crashed through Fletcher's carefully maintained home, their torches throwing wild shadows on walls that had sheltered quiet meals and growing trust. The explosion shook the earth beneath their feet. The house erupted in a pillar of flame and smoke, sending burning timbers spiraling into the star-filled sky. Men screamed and horses reared, the careful order of the attack dissolving into chaos. Fletcher and Leela Mee ran toward the mine where they had first found shelter, their feet finding familiar paths in the darkness. Behind them, confused shouts echoed across the desert as the bounty hunters tried to regroup around the burning wreckage of their certainty. "How many did we get?" Leela Mee asked as they reached the mine entrance. "Enough to even the odds." But their respite lasted only minutes. Torches appeared on the ridge above them, moving with the systematic precision of men who knew their business. Toomlin had not built his reputation by panicking under fire. "They'll surround the mine," Fletcher said. "Wait us out." "Then we don't wait." Leela Mee moved deeper into the tunnel, her memory navigating turns and branches that Fletcher could barely see. She led him to the hidden chamber where Blackwood's records had been stored, then pressed her hands against what appeared to be solid rock. Another concealed door swung open, revealing a passage that angled upward through the mountain's heart. Blackwood wasn't the only one who knew about hidden exits, she said. They climbed through narrow stone corridors that scraped their shoulders and tested their nerve. The air grew thin and cold as they ascended, but Leela Me never hesitated, her confidence born from desperate exploration during the months she had spent hiding in these mountains. The passage ended at a crack barely wide enough for a person, opening onto a ledge 50 feet above the mine entrance. Below them, torches moved in organized patterns as the bounty hunters established their siege. There, Leela Me pointed to a cluster of boulders where several men waited with rifles. Tombland's there, the one giving orders. Fletcher studied the tactical situation with a soldier's eye. The bounty hunters had made the classic mistake of assuming their prey was trapped. They had positioned themselves for a siege, without considering that the mountain itself might become their enemy. "Can you hit the man on the left from here?" Leela Me raised her pistol, sighting carefully down the barrel. The range was extreme for a handgun, but Fletcher had watched her practice for 3 weeks. Her aim had improved dramatically under his instruction. The shot echoed off the canyon walls, followed immediately by a cry of surprise. The wounded bounty hunter stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Fletcher's rifle spoke next, the bullet striking sparks from the rocks where Tombland crouched. The bounty hunters scattered, their careful positions abandoned as they sought cover from an attack that came from impossible angles. "Move," Fletcher said. They rappelled down the cliff face using rope Fletcher had cached for hunting expeditions, their boots finding purchase on ledges worn smooth by wind and time. The bounty hunters were still firing at the mine entrance, unaware that their quarry had already escaped the trap. At the bottom, Fletcher and Leela Me moved through shadows toward the horses. The animals waited where Fletcher had left them, trained to stand ground despite gunfire and explosions. But as they reached the corral, a familiar voice stopped them cold. "I thought I might find you here." Marshal Crenshaw stepped from behind the water trough, his badge glinting in the firelight from Fletcher's burning house. His gun remained holstered, but his posture suggested readiness for violence. "Marshal," Fletcher said carefully, "where are the federal marshals you promised?" "Delayed. Bureaucracy moves slowly, even when lives hang in the balance." Leela Me studied Crenshaw's face, noting something that Fletcher had missed. The man's eyes held regret rather than threat, weariness rather than aggression. "You have news," she said. "Blackwood's offering $5,000 now, dead or alive, but he prefers alive. Wants to make an example, stage a public trial before the hanging." The number hit Fletcher like a physical blow. $5,000 would bring every gun for hire within 1,000 miles. They could not run far enough or hide deep enough to escape that kind of money. "There's more," Crenshaw continued. "He's convinced the territorial governor to declare martial law in Silver Creek. Claims you're part of a larger conspiracy against white authority." Fletcher felt the ground shifting beneath them, the careful plans crumbling under the weight of political maneuvering they had not anticipated. "What about the evidence from the mine?" "Still evidence, still valid, but now I need federal authorization to act on it, and that authorization is being blocked by men who owe Blackwood favors." Leela Me moved to stand beside Fletcher, her presence steady despite the collapsing situation. "So we're on our own." "Not entirely." Crenshaw reached into his vest, withdrawing a folded document sealed with official wax. "I managed to get one thing before the bureaucrats took over. A federal warrant for Blackwood's arrest, based on the evidence you provided. It's not much, but it might be enough if we can serve it publicly." Fletcher took the document, noting the weight of official paper and formal language. Legal words that might save their lives if they could find a way to use them. "How do we serve a warrant when half the territory wants to kill us?" "Carefully," Crenshaw said, "and with help from people who know the difference between justice and mob rule." The marshal's words carried undertones Fletcher was beginning to recognize. Not everyone in Silver Creek had been swayed by Blackwood's performance. Some people still remembered the difference between evidence and accusation. Who? Preacher Pike, for one, Tom Brennan's having second thoughts after seeing what bounty hunters do to peaceful communities. Even some of the women are asking hard questions about why a rich man needs armed guards if he's telling the truth. Hope flickered in Fletcher's chest, fragile as candle flame but real nonetheless. They were not completely alone, not completely without allies. What do you need from us? Help me get close enough to Blackwood to serve this warrant. Once it's public record, his political protection disappears. The federal marshals will have to act, regardless of who owes whom favors. Leela Mee looked between the two men, reading the determination in their faces. It's a desperate plan. All the best plans are, Fletcher replied. Gunshots echoed from the mine as the bounty hunters finally realized their quarry had escaped. Soon they would spread out, searching every hiding place in the territory. We need to move, Crenshaw said. Dawn's coming and daylight favors the hunters. They mounted quickly, Fletcher and Leela Mee sharing his horse while Crenshaw rode point. Behind them, flames still licked at the ruins of the ranch house, consuming everything Fletcher had built during his years of self-imposed exile. But as they rode towards Silver Creek and an uncertain confrontation with Silas Blackwood, Fletcher realized he felt no grief for the burning building. Home was not a place built from wood and adobe. Home was the woman riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her breathing steady despite the danger that surrounded them. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also ready. I'm tired of letting other people define who I am." Fletcher nodded, understanding completely. Fear and readiness were not opposites but partners, two sides of the courage required to face impossible odds. Ahead, Silver Creek waited in the pre-dawn darkness, harboring both enemies and allies in measures they could not predict. By noon, they would either be dead or free, their names cleared or their bodies buried in unmarked graves. The sun climbed toward the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. A new day was coming, carrying with it the promise of justice and the possibility of peace, or the certainty of war. The choice, Fletcher realized, was no longer theirs to make. They had done everything possible to avoid this confrontation, but Silas Blackwood's greed had made conflict inevitable. Now they could only ride toward their destiny and trust that truth would prove stronger than lies, that justice would triumph over corruption, that love built on respect and shared struggle would survive whatever the day might bring. Behind them, the mine entrance yawned dark against the lightning sky, finally empty of its secrets. Ahead, Silver Creek waited with answers to questions they had been afraid to ask. Fletcher spurred his horse faster, racing the sun toward whatever conclusion awaited them in the dusty streets of a frontier town, where everything would be decided by noon. They reached Silver Creek as the sun painted the adobe walls gold and crimson. The town square buzzed with activity despite the early hour. Blackwood had called a public assembly, promising revelations about the criminals who threatened their peaceful community. Fletcher counted at least 50 people gathered around a makeshift platform where Blackwood stood in his finest suit. The man's silver hair caught the morning light, lending him an aura of respectability that masked his true nature. "There," Leela Mee pointed to the general store's second floor. "We can see everything from Mrs. Henderson's sewing room." They climbed the back stairs while Crenshaw positioned himself near the platform. The marshal's badge was hidden beneath his vest, the federal warrant tucked safely in his shirt pocket. From their window perch, Fletcher and Leela Mee watched Blackwood work the crowd with practiced ease. He spoke of law and order, of the dangers posed by criminals who hid among decent folk. Each word was calculated to inflame fear and prejudice. "My friends," Blackwood declared, his voice carrying across the square, "we face a threat to everything we hold dear. A murderous woman and her accomplice have brought violence to our peaceful community." The crowd murmured agreement. Fletcher recognized faces he had known for years, neighbors who had shared meals and conversations, now twisted by fear and false promises. "But I offer more than warnings," Blackwood continued. "I offer proof of a larger conspiracy, evidence that will shock you to your very souls." He gestured to his hired guards, who produced a wooden crate filled with documents. Fletcher's chest tightened as he recognized some of the papers from the mine. These records show a network of criminals operating throughout the territory. Weapons smuggling, theft from charitable institutions, even collaboration with hostile tribes. Blackwood held up one of the ledgers, but Fletcher could see from his position that the man was displaying blank pages while describing fabricated crimes. The woman who calls herself Leela Mee Washington is not merely a murderer. She is a spy working with enemies of civilization itself. The accusation hit the crowd like thunder. Women gasped. Men reached for weapons. The careful balance of community trust shattered under the weight of manufactured outrage. "Now," Leela Mee whispered. Fletcher nodded, understanding her meaning. They could not wait for a perfect moment that might never come. The crowd was reaching a fever pitch that would soon demand blood. They descended the stairs as quietly as they had climbed, emerging into the alley behind the store. Crenshaw caught Fletcher's eye across the square, reading the signal they had arranged. The marshal stepped forward, his badge now visible on his vest. "Silas Blackwood," he called, his voice cutting through the crowd's noise. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest." The square fell silent. Blackwood's composure cracked for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Marshal Crenshaw, surely you jest. I am the victim here, not the criminal." "The warrant says otherwise." Crenshaw began reading the formal charges, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Federal crimes, weapons trafficking, conspiracy to incite violence." Blackwood's hired guards moved to surround their employer, hands drifting toward their weapons. The crowd began to shift nervously, sensing violence brewing beneath the legal proceedings. "These charges are fabricated," Blackwood declared. "Lies created by criminals to escape justice. Then you'll have opportunity to prove that in federal court." Leela Mee stepped from the alley into the morning sunlight. Her appearance sent a ripple through the crowd, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. The woman with $1,000 bounty on her head, walking openly among them. "Before you arrest anyone," she said, her voice carrying despite its quietness, "the people of Silver Creek deserve to know the truth." She held up one of the genuine ledgers they had retrieved from the mine, pages filled with Blackwood's own handwriting documenting his crimes. "This man has been stealing money intended for schools and churches, selling weapons to hostile groups, staging attacks on peaceful settlements to justify military action that serves his business interests." Blackwood's face flushed red with anger and fear. "Lies, all lies. This woman is a known criminal, a murderer who would say anything to save her own neck." "Then let's examine the evidence together," Leela Mee replied calmly. She opened the ledger to a specific page, holding it high enough for the crowd to see the detailed entries. "Fort Huachuca, March 15th. Payment to provide false intelligence regarding hostile camps. Result: cavalry attack on peaceful village. 17 civilians killed." Fletcher felt the words hit him like physical blows, but this time they carried revelation rather than guilt. The crowd stirred uneasily, beginning to understand the magnitude of Blackwood's deception. Tom Brennan pushed forward from the crowd, his face grim with recognition. "That's your handwriting, Silas. I've seen it on contracts for 10 years. Other voices joined in, people who had done business with Blackwood recognizing the careful script that documented his systematic corruption. "More lies," Blackwood shouted, but his voice cracked with desperation. "Forgeries created by criminals and their allies." "Then explain this." Leela Mee turned to another page, reading aloud entries that detailed weapons sales, bribery payments, and systematic theft from charitable organizations. Each revelation hit the crowd harder than the last. These were not abstract crimes but personal betrayals, money stolen from their own churches, weapons that had killed their own neighbors. Blackwood's hired guards began backing away, reading the mood of the crowd and recognizing that their employer's money could not protect them from an entire community's rage. "Enough!" Blackwood pulled a derringer from his vest, the small weapon gleaming in the morning sun. "I will not be destroyed by lies and forgeries." The crowd scattered, seeking cover behind wagons and buildings. But Fletcher moved forward instead of back, his soldier's instincts overriding caution. "Put the gun down, Silas, it's over." "Nothing is over. I have built an empire in this territory. I will not see it destroyed by a woman and a broken-down cavalry officer." Blackwood swung the derringer toward Leela Mee, his finger tightening on the trigger. Fletcher lunged forward, knowing he could not cover the distance in time but trying anyway. The shot echoed across the square, sharp and final. But it was Preacher Pike who had fired, his old hunting rifle smoking in his steady hands. Blackwood's derringer flew from nerveless fingers as the man stumbled backward, clutching his wounded arm. "Sometimes," Pike said quietly, "a preacher has to protect his flock." Crenshaw moved quickly to secure the wounded man while the crowd pressed forward, their fear transformed into righteous anger. But it was controlled anger now, channeled through law rather than violence. "The federal marshals will be here by noon," Crenshaw announced. "Mr. Blackwood will face trial for his crimes in a proper court of law." Fletcher reached Leela Mee, taking her hands in his and feeling the tremor that ran through her fingers. The ordeal was finally over. The truth had been revealed. Justice would be served. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Free," she said, the word carrying 3 months of fear and desperation finally released. "For the first time in my adult life, completely free." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their daily routines with new understanding of the events that had shaped their recent lives. Several approached Leela Mee to offer apologies and welcome, recognizing her courage in facing down corruption. Tom Brennan shook Fletcher's hand with genuine warmth. "Sarah wants to invite you both for Sunday dinner. Proper welcome to the community." Fletcher looked at Leela Mee, seeing her smile at the simple offer of belonging. "We'd be honored." 6 months later, Fletcher stood in the same town square, but the scene had transformed completely. Instead of angry crowds and accusations, families gathered for the dedication of the new school that Leela Mee had established using the recovered funds. Children of all backgrounds played together in the dust, their laughter carrying across the desert air. Their teacher, a young woman from back east, had arrived 2 weeks ago with books and supplies purchased with money that had finally reached its intended purpose. Leela Mee emerged from the schoolhouse, her arms full of ledgers and lesson plans. The same careful organization she had brought to Fletcher's ranch accounts now served the cause of education and community building. "How many students today?" Fletcher asked. 23. "We'll need another teacher by winter." Fletcher nodded, making mental notes about construction and budgets. His ranch prospered under Leela Mee's financial management, providing steady income for both family needs and community projects. That evening, they stood together on the porch of their rebuilt home, watching the sun set over country that had become truly theirs through struggle and choice rather than simple ownership. "Any regrets?" Fletcher asked. Leela Mee considered the question seriously as she considered all important matters. About the hasty wedding, about the danger we faced, about choosing to fight instead of run, about any of it. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Every choice brought us to this moment." Fletcher pulled her closer, marveling at how naturally she fit against his side. They had traveled a long road from desperate strangers to genuine partners, learning to trust each other with their broken pieces and shared dreams. "I have a confession," Leela Mee said. "What's that?" "If you asked me to marry you again today, I'd give you the same answer." Fletcher smiled, remembering that night in the saloon when everything had begun with desperate words and impossible hope. "When's our next wedding?" he asked. "How about every morning when we wake up and choose each other again?" The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, distant and cold but constant in their courses. Fletcher thought about patterns and permanence, about the difference between surviving and truly living. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and rewards. The school needed expansion. The ranch required constant attention. The community continued to heal from the wounds Blackwood had inflicted. But tonight, for the first time in either of their lives, Fletcher and Leela Mee had everything they needed. They had each other, they had meaningful work, and they had the respect of neighbors who had learned to see past surface differences to the character beneath. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound carrying across the desert wind. Leela Mee's hand found Fletcher's, their fingers intertwining with the comfortable ease of long practice. They had built something beautiful together from the fragments of their separate tragedies. Not just a marriage, but a legacy of justice and acceptance that would outlast them both. The desert night settled around them, vast and peaceful and full of promise. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.